So this morning I'm going to be talking about the history of crimeware. So the thing that brings us all here, but first, real quick, an introduction. So as John said, I'm Paul Melson, and I work on Capital One's cybersecurity team. And as any of you who received the emails from SLEUTHCON know, that I've been in the industry for a little over 23 years. It was right in the subject line of the email that I'm really old. So that was awesome. And it's worse than that, because I've actually been in tech full-time since 1996. But my interest in computer and network security goes back even further than that, back to like my early high school days and dial-up bulletin board systems and so on. And so when I got the opportunity to transition into cyber full-time in 2001, I was really excited because at that point I was like getting the opportunity to work on and be a part of this thing that had kind of captured my imagination for what was pretty much a decade at that point in my life. So just incredibly blessed and lucky to even be here and have the opportunity to work in this amazing, dynamic, challenging, frustrating, constantly changing field. And so while I've been in computer security, network security, information security, cybersecurity, I'm old enough, I've been around for all the names, for over 20 years. The actual practice of information security predates my career, as long as it is, by another 20 years. So what we're going to do today, though, is we're going to talk a little bit about crimeware, and I'll define that for us in a moment. But what you can expect is part nostalgia road trip and part kind of retrospective and zoom out to see if we can identify any patterns that might give us something to kind of hang our hopes on for a little bit better tomorrow, maybe, and see what we could be doing better today. First, however, I want to share with you, and that is the people in the room, the folks watching online, and anybody who watches this talk later, that I've learned a lesson and have recently had the opportunity to codify it. And so if you're a professional, or if you want to join the ranks of those who get to punch miscreants for a living, you no doubt have been told about the value of building a professional network, right? And the value prop that you've been given is that it's good for job hunting, and if you're in people leadership, it's also good for being able to hunt for talent for your team. But the thing I don't want you to underestimate or overlook is the value of your professional network in threat hunting. None of us in this room has all the data, has all the skills, or has all of the ideas necessary to disrupt cybercriminal activity at scale. But people in this room and beyond that I've had the privilege to collaborate with over the years, those folks have worked to track, unmask, disrupt, and even support the arrest and prosecution of some real jerks. And that is so incredibly satisfying. Like, I can't tell you how much I love when bad guys go to jail, because it happens so rarely in cyber, right? But it's the best. And the effect, like John said as he was warming up the room, like, that's us. We're here. This is this group. If you're watching, this is you, could be you, can be you. So my ask is, please, today, make an effort to meet someone new here, exchange some contact info, follow each other on social media, join a Signal small group. Ask questions and share what you know, because you have no idea right now that you may just be the one holding the missing piece that helps the bad thing not happen and helps the good guys put the bad guys in jail. All right, with that, let's talk crimeware. First, I think we need to settle on a definition for what crimeware is and what it is not. Right? So crimeware is a portmanteau of the word crime and ware as in software, but we already have malware, right? Which is an amalgam of malicious and software. So how is crimeware different from malware? For the purpose of today's conversation, I'm going to suggest that crimeware is when the attacker uses software that is designed specifically to monetize the attack. I'll give you specific examples as we go, but the point is that we're looking at the nexus of financially motivated crime using software built for purpose. What crimeware is not is espionage, piracy, hacktivism, or defacement. These are all crimes, I grant you that. But the actor isn't doing anything specifically in those moments that generates money directly through their crimes. And so crimeware is also not viruses, worms, exploits, and malware that the actors use that don't immediately help them monetize the attack. So I'm not talking about generic attack tools. I'm talking about tools for monetizing attacks. And so the first piece of malicious software was probably written within a couple of weeks of the first programming language. And so to do a deep dive on malware, this is not that talk, because otherwise we'd have to go all the way back to World War II to start talking about some of this stuff. And it's cool that we don't have to do that. So how far back do we have to go? Dishonorable mention, because sure, this is technically the first recorded instance of a ransomware attack. The AIDS Trojan, so named because Harvard biologist Joseph Popp distributed his Trojan horse on floppy disks at the World Health Organization International AIDS Summit in 1989. But it doesn't count. And the reason it doesn't count, at first, it was total skiddyware. It was written in DOS batch. And second, the monetization was to mail a personal check to a PO box in Panama, and this scheme got him arrested almost immediately. So for today's purposes, however, we are going to be focusing on firsts. So those crimeware examples where novel capabilities and novel money-making schemes first came on the scene. I will probably skip over your favorite piece of crimeware. And not because it's not important, but simply because we don't have the time, because there's a lot of crimeware. So where do we begin? We do begin in 2001, when Nickelback was unironically popular. And much like how Nickelback overshadowed the Strokes' first album, the Code Red Worm, also named after an artificially flavored and sweetened drink, I might note, stole the headline that crimeware had arrived that same year. I've been struggling with how to make this next explanation land with an audience, recognizing that there are folks in the room that weren't alive when this happened. And if that's you, just keep that detail to yourself when we're talking later, because it's just gonna hurt. But so 1-900 dialers. To understand 1-900 dialers, you have to understand modems and 1-900 numbers. And if you weren't around, just lucky you. We didn't used to have high-speed internet blasted at us through the air, is my point. So these were mostly Trojan horses, often disguised as other programs, like say copy protection crack for Max Payne or Grand Theft Auto 3. And 900 dialers targeted Windows systems, specifically Windows systems that had modems and phone lines connected to them. And they would burrow in, build some persistence on the host, and then wait for the modem to be inactive, the system to be not in general use, like idle inputs, and then dial out to a toll number. And some of these numbers could charge up to $9.99 a minute. Usually it was just an internet redial, like connect out, and then the dialer program itself would actually interact with sites online, often adult content. So those of you that have been around long enough probably know these by another name. But anyway, and my first paid reverse engineering gig, the first time somebody gave me money to try and figure out what a piece of malware did, was a 900 dialer. And what we learned through that investigation, and the reason we were commissioned to do the work, was the client was a company who, there was a fairly active 900 dialer campaign that had a valid code signing certificate, like a valid VeriSign cert, that impersonated our client. And they were obviously not behind the $900. And so they wanted us to figure out who was so they could get it shut down because they were getting threatened with lawsuits and Better Business Bureau complaints and so on. Yada, yada, yada. We tracked it down to what was probably a front company based in Las Vegas, Nevada. So the original cybercrime, the original crimeware made in America. So. All right. Fast forward a few years, and IRC botnets. Now, I tried to be specific and give credit to the bad guys who did the thing first. This is actually an area where there's a certain amount of dispute about who came first and who did the thing. And it was actually like an active like battle that year. So when I think of IRC botnets, I think of things like Marina and Torpig, and they targeted primarily like Linux and Unix systems, Unix in this case meaning like Solaris, AIX, IRIX, and so on. Use default creds, publicly available exploits to pop these boxes, install their backdoor. They would connect out to IRC channels, private IRC channels for command and control, because why build infrastructure when you can steal it? And mostly they made money by either sending spam, which is, you'll see is a little bit of a theme, and ad click fraud. And ad click fraud, like back in 2007 was really, really simple stuff. Like there'd be a syscall in this binary that would like, hey, go to this URL with this like fake static referrer that gets me money as being the affiliate campaign and a fake user agent string, and just run curl. So not particularly sophisticated, but they were making money off of it. These bots were also often DDoS capable, which is sort of interesting because that same year you have Bagel and NetSky or Skynet botnets like get into this big kind of public flame war with each other over who invented it and who's the best and who's the coolest, and they use these DDoS capabilities on each other. So like the first like big internet bot like DDoS stuff was like criminal on criminal, which is kind of fun, right? Like that's sort of an interesting, and they would, and we saw replacement too, which was kind of neat. A new exploit would get made public and somebody would scoop that up, and then they would try and hit as many hosts as they could, and they would rip out the old bots and troll each other, and it was fascinating. And despite all that though, and despite all the activity, you don't really see DDoS extortion attempts until the Russians show up. So the storm worm, some of you may remember, it had a few different names, but the botnet, so the worm was called Storm and the botnet is called PCOM. It was spread by email attachment, usually e-card or a news headline, which is how it's got its name. The first wave targeted European email addresses with a story about a storm that had some fatalities. So they called it the storm worm. Real original, anyway. Targeted Windows hosts, unlike the IRC botnets. So not looking to dive into what was obviously kind of an internet swamp already. They went for a different attack surface. Used overnet P2P protocol for C2, which is encrypted peer-to-peer. So this is like one of the first uses of that as a capability as well. This was built and run by the Russian business network, everybody's favorite hosting company, and this was kind of their first, not their first piece of activity, but their first big outing into standing up this their business. At one point in time, I guess in 2007, Storm had over 1 million infected hosts reporting in, so pretty large. And they rented it out for DDoS, for spam and phishing. So still not necessarily seeing DDoS for extortion just yet, but they were getting paid to let other people DDoS things. So, kind of like the stressor model we have today. Fun fact, one of the inventors of the Storm botnet, a guy named Leo Kavayev, who's one of the founding members of the RBN, is serving time in a Moscow prison for crimes unrelated to his cybering, but happy that he's there. So every once in a while, the Russians get one right, I guess. I'll give you a minute. Okay, Zeus, spread primarily by email attachment. And if you went, Zeus was 2007, like you want to talk about a piece of malware that has had a great run. So spread by email attachment or drive by download. And this is, I think what's really interesting to observe here is you start to see the market and the ecosystem effect, right? Zeus was a thing you could just go buy. You didn't have to write it. You didn't have to know somebody. And the way that it was spread in a lot of cases was exploit kits, right? So Sweet Orange, Rig, Angler, Black Hole. Sorry, it's a little early for all of the trauma memories to come flooding back. But yeah, so Zeus was, kind of the first of a very wildly successful class of Windows malware, the banking Trojan, right? So even modern info stealers like LumaC2 and Formbook can trace their roots back to Azeralt and Pony and pieces of malware that got their start as banking Trojans, right? And it was just the rapid feature development and modular nature of these stealers, like Game Over and Spy Eye and Nymame and Drydex and Dire and TrickBot and Vautrack and so many others, right? It's just, it unlocked this massive flood of capabilities. And the monetization in this case is interesting because we're seeing ACH transfers out of banks. And there was some really, really novel stuff that came along over the time, form hijacking, man in the browser, which was wild as a way here's a fake logout button after you log into your corporate bank account with your RSA secure ID token. And we just keep a proxy connection through your host with your session key. You think you've logged out, but we're still in the bank account as you, which, and realize that feature is 15 years old, kind of wild. So anyway, now might be a good time to ask a rhetorical question, and also, candidly, a foreshadowing question, right? So given all of the innovation and the ongoing persistence of so much of the features and literally the code, right? So Zeus's source code gets leaks. It was intentionally leaked. That's a whole other, you could give a whole talk on just the Zeus drama, but the source code's out there and you can still see pieces of malware today. There's sometime in the last 30 days, a piece of malware has hit VT that has snippets of Zeus code in it, right? So given this longevity and the wild success and the proliferation of this capability, why aren't we still seeing mass targeting of bank accounts for ACH anymore? And I'll just leave you with that and we'll get back to it later. Most people tend to think of 2013 to 2017 as kind of the golden era for POS malware. But Fin5 and raw POS actually can be traced all the way back to 2008. And while they weren't the first group to go after credit card data, I think you have to credit Fin5 with being the first group to write and deploy a novel RAM scraper for specific purpose. So there have been lots of variations on intrusion vectors and tools used by Fin5 and then Fin6 and Fin7, who were also very much in the track 2 data game. And for those not familiar, what it was is a piece of malware that actually ran on the point of sale register system, Windows hosts, and would just look for track 2 data with using regexes mostly to find stuff coming off of keyboard buffers and serial buffers that would be credit card payment from a card swipe. And then they would take that data and then they would sell it to people who would clone and sell the cards. And that ultimately, despite all of the variation in kind of tooling and techniques and how just advanced and deep and complicated some of those operations became over the years, the end result was always the same. We just want to sell dumps. We want to sell fulls. We want to sell track 2 data to people who are going to clone cards and commit fraud. Well, where did Fin5 go? I wish. For anyone watching this later, someone in the audience said jail, and I don't believe that's the answer. But they do seem to have fallen off. Where we can still find some of their old comrades running around. Anyway, so jump forward almost 5 years before we see the next big advancement in crimeware, and that's CryptoLocker. So paid spam campaign on the Cut Whale botnet, also dropped directly to some systems by Game Over Zeus. The decryption for CryptoLocker, by the way, only cost $400, right? Like this was more, a lot of us, even in industry at the time, kind of looked at this and said, this is a nuisance. But that nuisance, despite mostly encrypting like college kids' homework and people's like family vacation photos, managed to net almost $27 million in a little over 2 months after it came out. And so as a result, almost immediately, there were clones, right? So the other operators, especially in the Russian-speaking countries, went all in, and you get CryptoWall, Torrent Locker, Petya, Locky, et cetera. And so you start to see Bitcoin extortion be this kind of like favored, they start experimenting with it. We, for a while, weren't estimating that they were having a ton of success, but at the same time, it turns out they kind of were, and they saw the vision. And that, of course, takes us to 2017, and you know what's coming next, right? So BitPaymer, look, I know where I am, and up to this point, I have intentionally avoided picking a fight over attribution so far. But come on, we all know Indrix Spiders, Fin6 is Evil Corp, right? Right? Nice. All right. Anyway, it's big game hunting time, baby, right? Like Dridex leads to PowerShell, leads to PowerShell Empire, leads to domain admin, leads to ransomware. Fun fact, this is the same attack chain Fin6 was using as far back as 2014 when they were deploying framework POS in some environments. So these folks don't actually know how to invent much, but they definitely know how to perfect it. And the influx of money over the years from big game ransomware is only comparable to the spam botnet boom of 20 years ago. There really isn't anything else we've talked about that has generated this much revenue in that time. And that really brings us to the redux. So what's happened along the way with crimeware? So what happened with the $900? Well, in 91 and 92, there was a law passed in a Supreme Court case, and and then in 93, the FCC created these regulations that led to telcos being required to immediately refund, fraudulent toll number charges, and the only way to reinstate them was for the toll number operator to file a complaint, et cetera, et cetera. It was a bunch of headache, and for years, those laws were on the books, but the telcos just kind of handled the complaints manually until $900 come along. And then they automate the abuse at scale, which drives up complaints and ultimately leads the telcos to, because they're refunding, at this point now, millions of dollars in fraudulent call tolls. And it leads them to just start kicking abusers off, sharing information about who the abusing companies are, and really raising the bar on what it takes to get a 900 number or toll number in place. And so between that and kind of the influx of cell technology, at the beginning of the 21st century, essentially this dies out. And what's interesting about it is really, the $900 precipitated, or at least accelerated, the death of 900 numbers altogether. IRC botnets. So IRC as a C2 protocol has sort of fallen out of fashion. It's clear text, and that makes it really easier to monitor and identify and detect and disrupt. But the botnet problem hasn't really gone anywhere, right? Spam botnets and click fraud botnets and sneaker bots and all that, it's still very much a part of the ecosystem. So I hope to give a talk someday before I retire about how spam botnets died out because we stopped using SMTP as a protocol to send messages. And even if I'm lucky enough to get to give that talk, where we sit today is the social media and SMS replacements for these botnets already exist. They're already up and running. So botnets maybe not going anywhere. So banking Trojans, in 2016, 49 states and the District of Columbia sue Western Union. And they sue Western Union over massive amounts of wire fraud that's coming from not exclusively banking Trojans, but definitely to include banking Trojans. And the case gets settled in 2017, but Western Union, as part of the settlement, agrees to revamp its anti-fraud program and work much more actively with law enforcement to try and combat these problems. And so this focus on especially extra-national exfiltration of money. And so it doesn't eliminate criminal wires, but it dramatically increases the likelihood that these wires are going to be stopped. And that, and that the mule accounts that are being used to order the money orders are going to get burned. So as a result, maintaining that mule network, that cash out network, gets a lot harder. So are money mules gone? No. Is wire transfer fraud gone? No. But the rate of success and therefore the profitability and the scale at which you can operate one is challenged. It's contested, and we've seen them fall out of fashion as a result. POS malware relied very much on the ability to scrape track 2 data out of RAM on Windows systems. The move to EMV chips over the last 10 years and the use of duck-put encrypted card auth has basically removed clear text data from memory. It's just not there anymore. You can't get track 2 data out of memory off of a system that's using this. And so that has ultimately kind of led to the demise of point-of-sale malware. In 2018, there's an interesting case from 2018, one of Fin7's last, where a grocery chain based in the Midwest was compromised, run through by Fin7, and Fin7 was able to get track 2 data out of the environment, but it was right in the press release that they only got data from the gas stations that this chain operated, because that's where they still had magstripe readers on the gas pumps and on the car washes, which is probably the best field test I've ever seen for something like that. So, and because that profitability has dried up, we've seen most of the Russian-speaking anyway, POS malware operators move into the ransomware space. Except for Fin5. Where did Fin5 go? So maybe, Dubai, that's a good one. All right, maybe. So where does that leave us today? Well, so ransomware today, as we deal with it, is dependent on cryptocurrency to move large amounts of money internationally without government interference. And crypto, that's perceived as a feature of cryptocurrency. That part of crypto is not going to change. However, as the poet laureate Clifford Smith Jr. famously said, cash rules everything around me. So to truly profit from cryptocurrency, criminals have to be able to convert it into cash, right? And so there exists an opportunity here for us to pursue anti-fraud controls at crypto exchanges and retailers that accept crypto, and that piece of the puzzle where crypto goes from being a pointer to value to an actual currency that can be used in the wider world. So the opportunity exists as well to sanction, prosecute, and otherwise isolate those businesses that refuse to comply with those requirements and regulation. But that means we're waiting for a law or some lawsuits or international resolution or other regulatory action. So I think you were kind of hoping that, first thing in the morning, the kickoff keynote would have this like uplifting and energizing message to conclude the day about how we're turning the tide. And I'm afraid I do not have that to offer. But what I do have to offer is this amusing picture entitled Sleuthy and the Grizz. And while you ponder the meaning and the origin of Sleuthy and his neon pal, this is how I remind you that we have disrupted, deplatformed, and pushed back against cybercrime for over 25 years. I have been blessed personally to see the rise and fall of both banking Trojans and POS malware over the course of my career. It's been done before, and we will do it again. So today, make some new connections, ask your questions, share your findings. There's an ancient proverb from the Luo people of Kenya, paraphrased and translated. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So here we go, again, together. Thank you.